outline of this morning's sermon. I hope that it is of some help, and I'll try to do this from time to time. The doctor, the kindness, the outcast, and us. First, we clear away some fog in the text Chris just read for us. When confronted with the paralyzed man, why does Christ at first ignore his obvious medical condition, but instead focus on forgiving his sins? Because in that era, any serious illness or disability was believed to result from the person's sin or serious moral failings. Such an affliction was thought to be proof that God was angry with him. That is why when Jesus seeks to offer proof that the man's sins have been forgiven, he tells him to stand up and walk. The healing of his paralysis is proof that his sins are forgiven. Next up, the tax collectors. They were despised for two good reasons. They were collecting for the Roman occupiers, who were Israel's conquerors, who had their heel on the Israeli government's neck. And they typically extorted more money from their own countrymen than Rome required. They pocketed the extra to enrich themselves, and some of them, like Matthew, became very rich. They were even barred and forbidden to enter any synagogues. Finally, why were the Pharisees so greatly offended when they saw Jesus and his disciples sitting at table and having a meal with Matthew and his cronies? Because even more than today, to accept hospitality from someone and enter their house to eat with them, back then was to show social acceptance and respect for your hosts, to affirm that they in fact were okay. But this morning's focus is the final verse. Go and find out what is meant by the scripture that says, "It is kindness that I want, not animal sacrifices. I have not come to call respectable people, people that feel they have no need of me, but outcasts." Kindness. Kindness for outcasts. Jesus did have a bias favoring outcasts, a preference for, a prejudice of strong sympathy for the outcast. Tax collectors, Samaritans, Gentiles, fallen women, lepers, the poor, and those mentally and emotionally ill who in biblical times were described as demon-possessed. None of the above would be welcome at table with the solid citizens of that day. Arguably, Christ's best-loved story revolved around an outcast. The Good Samaritan is his answer to the question, who is my neighbor that I am called to love as myself? Clearly, we are called, we are recruited to care for, to show kindness to the outcasts of our day. We can all call them to mind over the past and present of our own lifetimes. Those unwelcome, not entitled to kindness by a majority at a particular place and at a particular time. Those who are unwelcome. My own memories of outcasts go back to the late 1940s. Who do we speak of? Japs, Croats, Chinks, niggers, spics, kikes, heaves, whores, mix, thick mix, refugees, towelheads, queers, faggots, homos, dykes. A deeply touching New Testament outcast story is that of the fallen woman, known by all for her trade throughout our town, their town. She somehow crashed a Pharisee's dinner party where Jesus was in attendance. Before she could be intercepted, she made her way to Christ as the other guests looked on in scandal and shock. She then knelt at his feet, washed them with her tears, dried them with her hair, and anointed them with expensive lotion. In front of all, Jesus then pronounced her sins forgiven, and she herself loved of God. Few of Christ's commandments have been more challenging to keep than the call to love and minister to outcasts. And history's greatest, most appalling crimes and cruelties have been committed by nominal Christians against outcasts. Centuries of human slavery and the incomprehensible evil of the Holocaust. Ministering to outcasts can be difficult for the church today. It always has been. But it is our calling. Because we are a church, we must find a way. And in fact, we have found one way already through what is known as Help Kids India, where we support housing, health, and education for the poorest and lowest in India's terrible caste system, whose remnants still hang on. We need to treasure this ministry and become even more conscious of it. There is for all of us a more supremely important reason to embrace the outcast. Authorities whose field is the human mind and personality long ago made clear to us that we all have to live with feelings, impulses, and thoughts that we dare not admit to full consciousness. If we did, those feelings of fear, lust, anger, grief, and selfishness would ruin our peace of mind. They are a real part of who we are, but we make outcasts of them. Their presence is usually not our fault to begin with, but we make outcasts of those parts of ourselves anyway. With the grace of God and the kindness of Christ, we need to come to terms with and make peace with ourselves. We must learn to understand, forgive, and accept more of what is in our own hearts and minds, and so embrace the most important of all outcasts, ourselves. Mary Tyler Moore in the 1980 film Ordinary People played a mother who had lost a son who had drowned in a boating accident with his younger brother, Mary's only other child. Both boys were in their late teens. While Mary's film character could not admit it to herself, the son she had lost had always been her overwhelming favorite of the two boys. She was devastated. And she was angry at some level at her surviving son because he had survived and her favorite had not. Her less than conscious resentment of her remaining son gradually became apparent to him and his father, Mary's husband, played by Donald Sutherland. In one particularly moving scene, her surviving son, sensing his mother's terrible grief, tries to warmly hug and embrace his mother. Mary freezes and cannot respond to her son's sincere affection. Her face registers a kind of horror as she is forced to at least partially realize her deep resentment toward her own son. Her inner anguish has poisoned her heart and her capacity to love her son and her husband and anybody else. She later packs her bags and leaves her husband and her now only son. Father and son are left to try and comfort one another. Mary Tyler Moore later said in an interview that she felt she just had to play this role when it was offered to her. She said it powerfully reminded her of some of her own past, her relationship with her father, and with her mother, whom she had vowed never to become like, without success, of course. We, you and I, must go and find out what is meant by the scripture that says, "It is kindness that I want, not sacrifice. I have come to call outcasts." With God's help, we must recall and re-embrace important parts of our own hearts and minds. May God bless us as we try to do that. Our closing hymn this morning is found in the red hymnal, number 300.